Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's TADAT Livecast. I am Wafai Ibia. I'll be hosting today's conversation on behalf of the TADAT Secretariat in the Fiscal Affairs Department of the International Monetary Fund. For members of our audience who are new to the TADAT, you might be wondering, what is the TADAT? TADAT is an acronym for Tax Administration Diagnostic Assessment Tool, TADAT for short. TADAT is a tool designed to provide an objective assessment of the health status of the tax administration, or simply put, it identifies the strengths and weaknesses of a country's system of tax administration. The assessments conducted are conducted with reference to 9 performance outcome areas. If you're interested or curious to know what these performance outcome areas are, we encourage you to check out the TADAT website, www.tadat.org. There you would find more about the TADAT framework. At the end of each TADAT assessment, a performance assessment report, PAR for short, that's PAR, is prepared that gives a detailed synopsis of the results from the TADAT assessment. The PAR report provides a country or country officials, country authorities with a better understanding of the health status of their system of tax administration, a baseline used to embark on far-reaching reforms. We can say that one of the major goals of the TADAT is to facilitate improvements on certain reform objectives, establishing priorities and implementation sequencing and strengthening of the design of tax administration reform initiatives. In 2018, the Nigerian Federal Inland Revenue Service, FIRS, embarked on its first TADAT assessment. And earlier on this year, they also conducted its second assessment, what we call a repeat TADAT assessment. The country has also had several other TADAT assessments at the subnational level or the state level. Also, this year, Nigeria's president, His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu, set up a presidential committee of fiscal policy and tax reforms. The committee is tasked with a broad mandate to carry out critical reforms bordering on fiscal governance, revenue transformation, and economic growth facilitation. In today's chat, I speak with the chairman of this committee, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, about the objectives of the committee, and we also look into the role of the conducted TADAT assessments in designing and implementing the fiscal and tax policy reforms. So introducing my guest today, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele is the chairman, like I said, of the presidential committee. He was the fiscal partner and Africa tax leader at PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, where he worked for 22 years, including over 10 years in top leadership positions, gaining in-depth knowledge and diverse experience ranging from tax advisory and policy advocacy to business strategy consulting, leadership development, and policy design and execution. Mr. Oyedele is an accountant and an economist by training. He is an author, keynote speaker, mentor, and commentator on finance, business, and economic matters. He was the thematic lead for the Fiscal Policy and Planning Commission and chairman of the West Africa Debt Management Roundtable of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG. Chairman of the Taxation and Fiscal Policy Faculty Board of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, ICANN. Member of the Nigerian Taxation Standards Board of CITN, and the member committee on the design and implementation of Nigeria's national tax policy. He is a fellow of the Nigeria Leadership Initiative, member of the Global Tax Forum, and a former member of the Global Governing Council of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, ACCA. He is also an associate professor at the Babcock University of Nigeria and a guest lecturer at the Lagos Business School, Nigeria. He is an alumnus of the London School of Economics and Political Science, Yale University, and Harvard Kennedy School Executive Education. He is the founder and president of Impact Africa Foundation. Wow, indeed an distinguished guest. Welcome, Taiwo, to today's discussion.
Thank you, Wofai. It's a pleasure. And then thank you to TADAT Secretariat for hosting me on this program.
Thank you. So we'll go to the conversation today, but before we delve in, I'm sure our audience are curious to know more about the committee. So can you tell us a bit more about the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms, please?
Thank you. Like you rightly said in your introduction, the President of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, set up the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee. It was inaugurated on the 8th of August with a broad mandate, which we divide into three broad pillars. The first one is fiscal governance. Fiscal governance in the sense that we want to have a second look and be better at how we manage our finances in terms of revenue, both from tax and non-tax, the spending and then borrowing for government, and more importantly, the coordination between policy authorities, particularly fiscal policy and monetary policy, not only at the center, which we call the federal government, but also across subnationals. And then the second pillar is revenue transformation. Revenue transformation is focusing on domestic revenue mobilization, but it's looking beyond taxation. So it's looking at tax on one hand, but it's also looking at non-tax on the other hand. Even for the non-tax, we also have oil and non-oil revenue, including government assets, government-owned enterprises, and natural resources. And the big question is, how do you optimize value from these various sources of revenue? When it comes to tax, the question is, it's not just about collecting more taxes or more revenue from taxes. It's also about the redesign of the tax system such that the burden of tax compliance does not fall disproportionately on the people at the lower end of the ladder of society, being vulnerable households and SMEs. The third pillar of the committee's work is economic growth facilitation. And this pillar is the recognition that the most sustainable way to raise revenue is for you to grow the economy. When the economy grows and businesses thrive and individuals succeed, then it's much easier for them to part with a fraction of their success by way of taxes. So that pillar is looking at what are the impediments to business growth, both for domestic investors and the international investors, both for small businesses, medium and large businesses. And how can we remove those impediments, including those ones to do with international trade, import and export, the ones to do with the informal sector. So these three areas are the main focus of our committee's work. We also have some sub-components, which I wouldn't go into because of our time. And then we have key deliverables and outcomes that we're expecting from the work of the committee. It is not a committee where we commend efforts. It is a committee where we want to measure outcomes and impact on society as a result of our work. We know that even though the World Bank has stopped the ease of doing business and paying taxes ranking, but the last time this was done a few years back, we think that we could do better in terms of our ranking, both in terms of ease of doing business and even in terms of ease of paying taxes. We want our laws to be simple. We have been making incremental progress over time, but we think it's time for transformational progress, and that's the reason why we now have this committee.
Thank you very much, Taiwo, for that. I like that you highlighted that the committee isn't focused on just talking about efforts, but it's focused more about the outcomes. That is great. And you also mentioned there that the committee has, I think it has all areas covered. You're looking at the international scope and also the local scope and thinking about revenue generation. You also mentioned there that you have certain outcomes that you're seeking to achieve. I'm sure the audience will be interested in knowing these outcomes.
Yes. So we have the broad outcomes and we have, the breakdown into minute details, but I'll stay with the very broad outcomes that we're looking at. The first one is we want to ensure that there is fairness and equity in the tax system, because the tax system is an important component of the work of the committee. So this would address, for example, by reducing the multiple taxes that we have in Nigeria. I know for the Nigerian people, or people who have lived in Nigeria on this call, they would be familiar with those number of taxes. But for the international audience, we easily have, somewhere in the region of over 60 different taxes and levies that businesses and individuals have to pay in Nigeria, even though the bulk of government revenue, more than 96, 97%, is coming from less than 10 taxes. So one of the outcomes that we want to be able to accomplish is to harmonize and reduce the number of taxes to a single digit across all levels of government. We also want to be able to increase the revenue for Nigeria from taxes as a ratio of GDP from currently around 10% to about 18% within the next 3 years. And 18% is simply the average for Africa if you isolate Nigeria from that calculation. We also want to be able to increase revenue from non-tax sources for the government. We want to simplify the compliance. Even though the World Bank may not do this for us, we can do it for ourselves and see how much time are we spending today complying and what progress are we making. How credible is the database of our taxpayers' record? How easy is it for people to register, file, and pay their taxes, and how well are they doing that? And are they doing it on time in a way that we can measure? We also want to look at the quality of spending for government, because we think this is important in building trust with the people, because you need the fiscal exchange after you paid your taxes. You shouldn't then spend money on implicit and informal taxes to take care of what government should ordinarily do for you. We are also looking at having better coordination in terms of policies. First and foremost, within the tax authority itself, we need to have coordination, whereas the tax authority at the federal level with tax authorities, tax administration at the state level, that's sub-national, are working together, not just working together about attending meetings, but having databases, having handshake, interactions, technology system, and exchange of information and intelligence that bring all of them together. But even beyond that, to have coordination with other agencies and institutions of government and the private sector, whether you're talking about business registration, land registry, whether you're talking about quality, agencies, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the goals and aspirations we have for ourselves. We're going to rewrite all our major tax laws so that they are modern, so that they are simple. And in fact, we're planning to be able to translate them into the languages, that our people speak, Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, and maybe also Pidgin English. So these are some of the targets and goals that we have for the work of the committee.
Wow, Taiwo. Again, it's really interesting to see that the committee is thinking about everyone and trying to factor in all the impediments that lead to hindrances in generating revenue. You mentioned there that you'll be working on translating these policies into the different languages. That way, everyone has an understanding. That is really great. And I feel like you've answered what was going to be my follow-on question, but because this platform is for knowledge sharing, the original objective of the platform is that there is knowledge sharing amongst revenue administrations. I'll go ahead and ask the question anyways, in case maybe you still have some things to say. So the question is, why is the Reform Committee important to reforming the Nigerian tax administration system?
Yeah, great question, actually. So that's an important question. So like I said earlier on, we believe that we had made incremental progress over the years. We had a national tax policy in 2017. We started working on annual finance acts. We did about 4 of them since then. And we have incrementally reformed the system in terms of using technology. FRS, for example, had adopted a technology solution for tax administration. And so some of the state governments as well. We have also been able to provide threshold around VAT registration, around income tax to protect the vulnerable people. But we also recognize that there's still a lot that we need to do. Looking at Nigeria as the largest economy in Africa, we should not be lagging behind. We think we need to provide leadership even for the African continent and play a major role within the international stage. So the whole idea, the reason why this committee is important to our reform is that it enables us to adopt a holistic approach, and that's why it's a presidential committee, so it can cut across and cut through barriers. So you're not limited to Ministry of Finance, for example. Part of what we're doing, we have some coordination with the monetary authorities, which is our central bank. We have some coordination with some agencies of government that are involved with trade, like the port authorities, NIMASA, that's the Maritime Agency, Communications Commission. So we're able to adopt a broad approach. And not only just adopting a broad approach, it enables us to be inclusive. So we have reached out to Nigerians, businesses for feedback. We currently have a dedicated website. We have a dedicated email account, phone account, WhatsApp account, and social media accounts where we have full information about what we're doing. And then we have submissions, forms for submission of inputs, for inquiries, for whatever it is that people want to interact with us. And we're going to begin in the next couple of weeks our stakeholder engagement, where we're going to have virtual meetings. Some of them will be physical meetings. And we've set up different stakeholder groups that we're going to engage with intentionally. And that includes people living with disability. Sometimes they're not remembered in policy formulation. We're going to be talking to artisans. We're going to be talking to farmers. We're going to be engaging with Nigerians in the diaspora. We're not asking them to come and pay taxes in Nigeria. We're going to be sharing their experiences because they're also an important stakeholder group for our country. We're also going to be talking to the big-time investors, international investors, multinationals, their advisors, professional bodies, practitioners. We're also going to be engaging with the tax officers themselves. Sometimes we're formulating policies that affect the tax system without asking the tax officers about their own pains and their own perspectives. So the reason why this is really important is that holistic approach that's inclusive for us to identify what the problems are, to co-create the solutions to them, and implement in a way that benefits everyone.
Thank you, Tayo. To our audience who are joining us, thank you for joining us. If you're joining us on YouTube or LinkedIn, please feel free to send us your comments, your questions that will be answered here. Mr. Chairman will be answering questions. We'd like to hear from you if you're joining us from LinkedIn or YouTube. And speaking of that, we have our first questions from Adedayo Adedokun joining us on YouTube. He says he would like for you to address the issue of withholding tax. The taxman do not obey ordinary course of business. Everything is, I believe he meant to say taxable, which leads to increase in cost of goods and burden on consumer. Yeah, I believe he meant taxable. He wrote whiteable, but I think he says taxable.
Yeah, I fully understand the question. So thank you to the person that asked the question. So we recognize this withholding tax regime in Nigeria is unnecessarily complicated. It's burdensome, and sometimes it also takes away from businesses part of their working capital, constraining them from doing their businesses well and growing and reinvesting. So that problem was identified, at the beginning of the work of our committee. So as we speak today, we have a draft withholding tax regulation, which we hope to be able to push out and publish before the end of the calendar year. And that new regulation would address a lot of these problems. You wouldn't see ordinary cost of business, which is sometimes difficult to interpret, and it's ambiguous. So the taxman has their own interpretation, the taxpayer has a different one. That's not the system that you want for yourself. It's already hard to pay taxes. It shouldn't be harder figuring out what you need to pay. So the good news I have for the person who has the question is we're working on it, and in a matter of weeks, we should be able to come back to the people at and the Nigerian society with a solution.
Thank you, Taiwo. I think the next question still is linked to the previous question, and it is Dowsy joining us on YouTube. He says, how will the current effort reduce the multiple taxes of manufacturing companies and the influx of regulatory bodies visits to companies to demand levies and harass manufacturers in their premises?
Yeah, awesome question. So we are harmonizing three important things. The first one is the number of taxes. Like I said earlier on, there are over 60 there of those taxes officially. Unofficially, nobody knows. I think it's more than 200 because we did a study about 10 years ago for manufacturers, interestingly, and there was a state where if you combine all the taxes across levels of government, it was 197. And that's just for one state. So what we're trying to do now is to focus on what exactly are the most important taxes. You can always, I think anyone, you don't need to be a tax expert to know income taxes, consumption taxes by way of value-added tax, property tax, maybe excise tax. So those important taxes are the ones we want to focus on, and then do away with the other taxes. So we harmonize the number of taxes, not only for manufacturers, for everyone. So nobody will have to pay so many taxes. Number two is we want to harmonize the revenue administration. Currently, we have in some cases, all manners of agencies showing up, wanting to collect one tax or the other, and also carrying out tax audit, which is really destructive. And in fact, it makes our system to be inefficient. So we spend too much to collect the little we are collecting. The people are paying so much, government is collecting so little. So those inefficiencies we want to address by harmonizing revenue administration in Nigeria so it can be unified as much as possible. And the third thing is we're also harmonizing the revenue reporting. So the way it's done today is you could easily find, if you're trying to calculate tax to GDP ratio in Nigeria, you need to find different agencies to pull them together. And then if you want to do revenue to GDP ratio, you have even a bigger tax on your hand. At the federal government level alone, we've got about 63 different government agencies that have one revenue target or the other to do. So all of these are the things we are trying to harmonize. And once we are done, I think this will be a big relief for the people and for businesses as well.
Thank you, Tayo. Let's bring in the TADAT. So Nigeria has undergone 2 TADAT assessments of the Federal Inland Revenue Service and several other TADAT assessments at the subnational level. Are there reports like, sorry, I beg your pardon. Are the reports from these assessments relevant in achieving the committee's objectives as you've highlighted earlier? And if yes, how relevant are they?
Yeah, no, the reports are extremely relevant, and I have seen those reports that have been done for the FRS, the 2 reports, as well as the report that have been done for some of the subnational, particularly the Federal Capital Territory Internal Revenue Service, and the issues and the way, because for us, it's really important to use data. I think it was Edwards Damien that said, in God we trust, all others must bring data. So for us, our approach is data-driven, which means, and if you look at, TADAT report is based on data, is based on evidence. And the areas in terms of the performance outcome, you're looking at integrity of the registered taxpayer base, effective risk management, voluntary compliance, timely registration, filing and payment. And even most importantly is the accountability and transparency. So these are the feedback we have received from our people. These are the things we have seen that could be better with our tax system and revenue administration more broadly. And therefore, we're going to be using a lot of the input from the TADAT assessments, as well as some of the recommendations there. We will take them on board. For example, there are very important recommendations around the use of technology for tax administration. And you also have recommendations in terms of coordination, which are some of the things I've mentioned and which, fall squarely within the terms of reference of our committee. So yeah, it will be important for us.
Thank you, Taiwo. indirectly or directly listed the 9 performance outcomes I mentioned earlier. So for our audience, if you were listening, I'm sure you would have caught that Mr. Oyedele mentioned the 9 performance outcome areas. We have a question from Mahamadu joining us on LinkedIn. I believe the question has been answered. He says he's joining from Cameroon, and he wanted to know if Nigeria has been formally assessed. I believe he means TADAT assessment, and if the Presidential Committee has the recommendations of TADAT as targets for the reforms. So I believe you've just answered that question.
Yes.
So
yes,
I'll go to apologies.
Yes, I'm just confirming that I've answered that question, and it's in the affirmative.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So my next question for you is, based on the conclusions from the TADAT assessment, what will be the relative priorities for the committee's attention, and how far do you intend to go in terms of tackling the weaknesses that are highlighted in the performance reports for the concluded TADAT assessments?
Yeah, so the priorities for us, if I put it in the form of thematic areas, is 1, to ensure there's fairness in the tax system. 2 is to ensure efficiency in the tax system, and 3 is to build trust between government, tax administration, and the taxpayers, and more broadly, the Nigerian people. So if you then think about the fairness aspect of it, we're going to be ensuring that the burden of compliance, because if you haven't thought about this carefully in your tax system, what you find is that the small businesses, not only do they have to pay too many taxes, the burden of compliance on them relatively is much higher. I have a tax of $100 to pay, but the cost of compliance is $200. It doesn't make sense, for a small business. So that's not fair in itself. So we're also going to ensure efficiency. Efficiency for us, we're going to leverage a lot on technology. So it's easy for you to register, it's easy for you to file your returns, and more importantly, it's easier for you to even make payments. And also, this will also help us in terms of, the accuracy of the declaration, because if you're asking people to do that which is not possible, bearing in mind the structure of our economy where we have a very large informal sector, then you're probably just calling for trouble already within the tax system. So the efficiency will come from administration, from using technology, and we're going to build trust by ensuring that there's proper accountability and transparency, which is one of the outcomes for the TADAT assessment. One of the things we recognize in terms of dispute resolution, which is also another priority for us, is that it takes so long for people to get, maybe if you call it justice within the tax system. For the large businesses, while that is not ideal, they can afford it. So sometimes you're there in the process for 5 years or even longer. But for a small business owner, they can't even afford professional representation. They cannot pay an accountant. They cannot pay a lawyer. So we are looking at setting up the Office of Tax Ombudsman in Nigeria that can then intervene and protect. One is to have a sort of oversight over the work of the revenue authorities, and 2, to protect the taxpayers, particularly those who cannot defend themselves. So these are going to be some of the areas of priority for us. For the use of technology, we want to ensure that ease of doing business with government is there, not only at the federal government level, but also at the state level. From the TADAT report, one of the recommendations is the need for us to have some other modules in the tax promax. We've received a lot of feedback from taxpayers about what they would like us to do differently with that tax promax. We have some state authorities that don't even have a working, internet or website that you can interact with for your tax affairs. We also want to introduce fiscalization for VAT, such that we can close the tax compliance gap. We do think that, it's not fair in a society where you allow a few people to carry the burden of tax who want to do well and their tax compliance, when they operate in the same market with loads of other people who are evading their taxes. What you then do is you inadvertently compensate and incentivize bad behavior, and you punish the guys who are trying to do the right thing, such that in the medium to long term, they can't even compete. So we're going to be addressing that using a lot of data and intelligence and technology more broadly. So these are some of the priorities for us.
Thank you, Taiwo. I see that the committee is doing a lot in the aspect of facilitating voluntary tax compliance, and which is a great thing. This is POA 3, I believe, of the TADAT framework. And not to put you on the spot, but as you were talking, I remember coming across the committee setting up focus group sessions. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what the committee intends to achieve with holding these focus group sessions?
Yes, so the idea behind the focus group session is just the realization that you cannot use the same brush to just paint everyone. The realities and the peculiarities of every sector might differ. So when you speak to small businesses and farmers, their issues are likely to be very different from multinational companies. When you speak to financial services, it will be very different from when you speak to entertainment and the creative sector. So what we're trying to do with the focus group is to bring the issues home for them, to understand their businesses better, to listen to them, tell them what we're planning to do, and receive their own input as to how we carry out our work. So we think that overall, this focus group play an important role and it's a critical part of our co-creation philosophy around this whole reform that we're undertaking. Some of the principles that we set out as given to us by Mr. President as part of our mandate is that we do not want to tax capital, we do not want to tax investments, we do not want to tax production as much as we can, and then we do not want to tax poverty. So what we want to do is to allow you invest and then, tax the returns on your investment, allow you to produce and then tax the consumption with proper protection for the poorest people. And not to tax poverty, we wait for you to make wealth, and then out of the wealth you've created, you can share with the government. So these are some of the philosophies. We would also then interpret this into what does it mean in terms of the details. They say the devil is in the details. You may be speaking to a small business owner, and like the question around withholding tax, if I have to pay an advance tax, the withholding tax and advanced tax payments in many cases, other than a few exceptions, if my advanced tax is higher than my actual tax, or in fact, I have no profit, but you've collected an advanced tax from me in January, when my tax is only due 12 months later or even 18 months later, you've just denied me of the money for working capital in a country where the cost of borrowing can be as high as 26, 27% for those small businesses. So that is now interpreting that big philosophy around not taxing investment and capital into everyday reality. And then we say, how do we address the problem? So that's the approach we want to adopt. And we're looking forward to those focus group. It will start by the end of November and run for about 1 month. We're not going to end it, after 1 month. It will just be the phase 1. We'll continue those engagements subsequently and over the life of the committee's work.
Thank you, Taiwo. Just for the benefits of our audience from Nigeria, what is the criteria for selecting participants in this focus group, and how do Nigerians have access to say their piece in regards to these focus groups?
Yes, so we have no criteria other than first come, first serve. We have broken them down we have about 36 different groups, and then we've merged those different groups together into like 17 focus groups. We have a limit to the numbers we can take. I do not know exactly how many we have now. I think about 300 per session. So we already have published the registration for people to register. So if we have less than 300 for a focus group, we would accommodate everyone. If we have more than 300, we'll take first come, first serve. And most likely we then plan a rerun so that we don't leave anyone behind. So essentially, I think the way to answer your question is we're not leaving anyone behind. Everyone is welcome to participate.
Perfect. That is good to know. So not to distract ourselves from the questions we have for today. And meanwhile, we have so many questions coming in from the audience, and we encourage you to send us more of your questions and your comments. We are about to get into answering these questions. So, Mr. Chairman, my question for you, my next question for you is, what methodology would the committee adopt? What is the reform plan for tackling the weaknesses from my previous question, which had to do with the recommendations from the TADAT assessment reports?
Yeah, so for us, we think it's important to spend a lot of time identifying the problems correctly. Otherwise, if you rush into finding solutions, you may be solving a problem that does not exist or solving it incorrectly, and in the process, creating a bigger problem. So we're doing proper diagnosis now, and that's where the TADAT assessment report is coming very handy as part of the input into our process. Then we are currently at the stage of consultation, where we are going to be speaking to our stakeholders to try and understand the questions from the problems from their perspective, and then co-create the solution that we want. We are focusing, like I said before, on the outcome approach, impact. So we'll say we have reduced the number of taxes from over 60 to less than 10. And so what does that mean actually? So it means that, there's clarity for compliance. The burden of compliance is less. We have administration of the taxes because it's now unified. People are able to pay easily and track the payment they have made because we're using technology. We want to actually outlaw cash payment, for example. We think that if anyone is too poor to be able to afford a mobile phone, it doesn't have to be a smartphone, to use USSD to pay taxes. We think they should not be paying taxes at all. They should just be exempted. So that means that you then cut out what we have currently, where you have non-state actors enforcing tax collection. And sometimes it can be really rudimentary and very aggressive in how those things are done. We'll then leverage on technology as part of our approach and methodology for all of this. We're going to be having a lot of surveys, asking people to provide information and substantiating them. And then we would implement and monitor on an ongoing basis. One thing that is different about this committee is that what you usually find is that a committee is set up to advise government, then they submit a white paper, and then they move on. What we are trying to do differently is that Mr. President has said to us, I'm not just interested in reports. So as we come up with an idea, we debate it, we engage with stakeholders, we use data, we recommend, it's approved, we start implementing, and then we pick on the next recommendation. So in the lifetime of this committee, we are going to be doing implementation concurrently as we recognize, identify, and provide solutions to some of the problems within the system.
Thank you so much, Tayo. Thank you. You mentioned multiple taxation, and in that regard, we have a question from a member of the audience, Tunde, joining us on LinkedIn. He's asking, multiple taxation has crippled a lot of businesses in Nigeria, and most especially the SMEs, which cannot withstand this burden. How does the fiscal team assist to manage the state IRS by harmonizing tax through the JTB? I'm not sure what that means, and getting compliance from all states to avoid further danger in creating hostile business environments?
Yeah, good question from Tunde there. So the JTB is the Joint Tax Board, is the association, let me put it that way, is the association of all the revenue administration in Nigeria. So they are a big part of the work we're doing. So we have 6 heads of internal revenue services from the 6 geopolitical zone across Nigeria that are full members of the committee. We have the Joint Task Board Secretary as well, and we have the chairman of the Joint Task Board, who doubles as the chairman of the FRS, are all members. We also have a revenue administration work stream. We call it a subcommittee. And we have many of the administrators as members of that committee. So what we're trying to do is to listen to them. So we're listening to everyone. In fact, part of our interaction also extends to the local government. So we listen to them. These are the taxes we have. These are the levies we have. Some of them are called user, fees, user charges. They'll tell you it's not a tax, but you're forcing me to pay an amount that's higher than I would have paid to an independent third party. So there's an element of tax in that. So we're looking at all of that. We are rewriting our tax policy, and we're saying to ourselves, why is it just even a tax policy? Why is not a policy that covers not only taxes, but other revenues and charges and fees, as well as government spending and government borrowing? Should the government build an airport when they have no primary schools? Should they, build flyovers when they have not been able to provide clean water? Because some of the objectives is to ensure that there's proper fiscal exchange for the people, for the taxes that they pay, in a way that is meaningful. If you look at the multidimensional poverty index calculation, the things that are putting a lot of our people in poverty are not those very, flamboyant, sophisticated things. They're the basic things that they need. So we want to be able to connect the revenue system, including taxation, to the basic needs of the people in a meaningful way. So we believe that the tax administrators, whether it's at the state, local government, or federal level, they just want to collect more revenue. So that objective is, we don't have a problem with it. But we want to be able to use data to convince them that actually, by having over 60 different taxes, we collect less, even though the people are paying more and frustrated in the process. We can have fewer taxes that are broad-based, high revenue yielding, and easy to collect. And so the taxman collects more, the taxpayer pays less, and everyone is happy. So that win-win approach is what we are adopting. We already have a draft of how many taxes we end up with. And I can tell you that all these tax administrators from subnational and the federal are all very excited, actually. So we were anticipating that there will be a lot of objection and pushback, but that hasn't been the case. Everyone seems to be on board, and we like to keep it that way.
That's interesting. It's good to know that everybody's on board and you don't have opposition in this regard. And you mentioned earlier something about infrastructure development and taxation. And on that, we have a question from a member of the audience, Basi, joining us on LinkedIn, I believe. And he's asking how the taxes will help the Nigerian government in infrastructure development, seeing that most of the roads are dilapidated in Nigeria, especially at the southern region of Nigeria. He says, how will the informal taxes help those paying these taxes?
Yeah, thank you, Basi, for that question. So at the end of the day, at the heart of the taxation system and the fiscal system is the social contract. And the social contract is really that as citizens, you play your part, including paying taxes, and government should use those taxes to take care of the people. That's the social contract. So we think that infrastructure development, and more importantly, maybe this is also my personal view, is that investment in human capital development, particularly education and health, should be the priority of government. And that should reflect in the way we budget and the way we spend our money, and then making sure that they impact the lives of people positively. So part of what we're doing now is we're working through a process. We're engaging with the subnationals. So we got invitation to attend the National Economic Council, which is a platform for the state governors with the vice president and a few other people. We've spoken to them, and they were actually very receptive to some of our recommendations, which includes developing a spending framework. We're hoping that if we're able to push this idea through, there will be a portal, maybe also an app, where you can see all the states in Nigeria, including the Federal Capital Territory, all the 774 local governments in Nigeria, as well as the federal government. You see their spending. If it's a physical project, you see the location of it. You see videos of the progress we're making and pictures. And we have the civil society, including the likes of budgets, to help us monitor that. But even more importantly, is the ordinary person that says, well, I saw this thing on the portal or the app. Maybe this project does not exist, or maybe it's being duplicated. So you then have this transparency that enables for proper accountability and transparency in how revenue is collected and how it's being spent and how it's being prioritized in the areas that are most important to the people, of course, including infrastructure. When you provide infrastructure, everyone will benefit, whether you're a small business, medium size, or large firm.
Thank you, Taiwo. Two keywords I got from your response, transparency and accountability. So I hope that Basi, you're satisfied with that response. We have another question, Mr. Chairman, from Joshua, joining us on LinkedIn. He says, how would the committee help to develop and enhance SME projects from, sorry, I think he meant SME projects to grow the GDP, which invariably increases tax revenue. Many Nigerians will be employed and reduce crime rates.
Yes, so thank you, Joshua. We think that SMEs hold the key to our economic development and addressing unemployment and even social vices, because we have a lot of young people who have graduated, they can't find jobs, the environment is not conducive for them to create their own jobs. What do you then expect? So they become a very easy candidate for all the vices that you don't want in society. So for us, we are prioritizing the SMEs. We think that if we use data properly, and we're working through that process now, we think that the vast majority of small businesses should not be paying taxes. They shouldn't have to pay personal income tax. In many countries, you have thresholds that are meaningful to say if you earn, I think in the UK now it's about £13,000. If you earn about £13,000 in a year, you don't pay income tax. There are many countries where they have very reasonable threshold for VAT. So once you do that design properly, and then you remove the impediments to businesses, you address the multiple taxation and overregulation. We have somewhere in the region of, almost 40 million, based on various data, of micro, nano, small, medium enterprises in Nigeria. If you allow just one each of these businesses to grow and be able to employ just one more person, you create significant employment. You create significant economic growth, and then the society will benefit. Even if you decide to tax only 5%, the top 5% of that 40 million, let's say you exempt 95%, the 5% that you are taxing will make even more tax yield to the government than what we are collecting today. In many countries, you easily find that the top 1%, the top 2% of society pay more taxes than the bottom 98% combined. This is where we think we need to be. We have historically focused on the bottom of the ladder of society to carry the burden of the country. And that's why it hasn't worked and is unlikely to work. No country has become wealthy by taxing poverty. So we want to prioritize enabling businesses, particularly the small one, over trying to extract money from them under the disguise of tax collection.
Thank you, Taiwo. We have a question from Yetunde joining us on YouTube. She says the insurance sector has a practical problem. Insurers are unable to deduct withholding tax from brokers because the commissions are deducted at source. How can this issue be resolved since brokers are audited too? If that's
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Yetunde, for that question. So we have a focus group with the insurance sector. I have an idea of what the problems are because, as an insured, you pay to a broker and the broker pays to the insurance company. So most time the broker would have retained their commission before paying to the insurance company. And then the tax man will go to the insurance company and say, you did not deduct withholding tax from this payment. They say, well, but I had no means of deducting the withholding tax because it was retained by the broker. So you didn't have issues, the broker has an issue, the insurance company has an issue, and it's creating problem for the insurance sector, which we think in Nigeria needs to be a lot bigger than it is. In many countries, you have the insurance sector bigger than the banking sector. In Nigeria, I think that, that sector needs a lot of support. What I'll do is to encourage Yetunde and other stakeholders in the insurance sector who are interested in our engagement, and they should be interested, to watch out for our focus group. So this information is available on our website. Fiscalreforms.ng is the website. The same thing, Fiscal Reforms NG, you find our social media accounts. You see all the groups, you see the dates, you see the link for you to register. So please register to attend and encourage other people to do so you can share more of your perspective with us, and we'll try our best to solve those problems.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a final question from the audience. Still Dowsey, joining from Cameroon and on YouTube, is asking, he says that some of the, I beg your pardon, some of the TADATs, okay, I think what he means is that at the subnational level, some of the subnationals do not meet the TADAT outcomes, like they are weak in terms of the scoring at the subnational level. So he's asking, is there support from the FIRS to states, especially on technology and direct access to its portals, for example, validating third-party data?
Yeah, thank you, Dowsey. I hope I got the name right. So the approach we are adopting, and we have a lot of partners, including even the IMF, is also one of our partners, and we're speaking to them on technical assistance. But what we're trying to do is to do a proper assessment of where we are at those subnational levels, using a few of them as the case study. And number two is part of the plans we have is to create a revenue single window. That's the working name we have for it now. The final name might be different, but conceptually, what it means is there's one portal you go to and one app where you go, and you find all the taxes that you need to pay, who needs to pay them, the rate of those taxes, when they need to pay, who they pay to, right? So just imagine the transformation that will bring in terms of clarity and ensuring that nobody is extorted from illegal taxes, because it means that once you go to that portal or the app and the tax is not there, then the tax is not due. By the way, when you have over 60 different taxes, it's easy to be extorted. But if those number of taxes are less than 10, and as a business or an individual, nobody pays more than 3 or 4, then you most likely remember those taxes. You pay them once as much as possible per annum, unless in other cases like PAYE, where you continue to pay on a monthly basis. We think that this clarity will help. And then that harmonization of the intelligence, the system, and the database for compliance for taxes due, who should pay them, when to pay, would help us greatly to improve the capacity at the subnational level and provide clarity to the taxpayers for their tax obligations.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. This has been a very interesting conversation. As I mentioned earlier, one of the main goals of this platform is to share knowledge amongst revenue administration. So I'm wondering if you would have some key points or some key recommendations for other tax administrations or other revenue administrations that might be listening in on this conversation, if you would have any parting words for them.
Yes, and in my previous role, I was the Africa tax leader for PwC. And I've traveled a lot across Africa and some other developing countries outside of Africa. And I've also seen a lot of what's going on within the developed economies, particularly the OECD countries. And I can tell you that the challenges we're facing in Nigeria are not peculiar to us. So we actually see this role and this project as a Pan-Africa project, which can also be relevant to other developing economies. So we would encourage, first and foremost, and I was with the African Tax Administration Forum a couple of weeks ago in Cape Town for the annual general meeting. And these were also some of the things we discussed to say we have to all embrace these reforms to be able to ensure that Africa is truly rising and that we make prosperity common for our people to lift them out of poverty. So my word to the administration is think beyond tax. Tax laws and tax administration are not the reason why we generate tax revenue. Tax revenues are the consequences of economic activities. We must encourage, facilitate, and stimulate those economic activities first and foremost before we talk about the taxes we want to collect from them. And also my words for the taxpayers will be always play your part. Do your best to be compliant. I think that the days of tax evasions are over. It's not good for society. And then for governments, whatever revenues we collect, let's use it for the people. And let's be transparent in doing so, ensuring that our priorities are right and connect with the needs of our people, particularly those at the bottom of the ladder. At the end of the day, there's this quote that I know, which is by Abraham Lincoln, that says the best way to predict the future is to create it. So if Nigeria is not the Nigeria of our dream, if Africa is not the Africa of our dream, and so applies to other developing countries, we can come together and create that future that we desire, and I think that we do need. We can make it happen. Let's engage. Please support what we're doing. Give us your feedback and inputs, and we can create the future together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You heard the chairman there. Send in your feedback and work together with the committee. Key words here, a lot of key takeaways from this conversation, but something I would like to reiterate is that the chairman said no country has become wealthy from taxing the poor, and he's also admonished the taxpayers to do their own parts, play their own parts in paying their taxes. And the revenue administrations, he said that they should think beyond taxes. So it's not just collecting the taxes. That is amazing. And the chairman also mentioned some keywords, something that you might have heard a couple of times on this platform through our TADAT coffee chat is co-creation. I just had to highlight that because it comes up in most of our TADAT coffee chats, co-creation. So we like the idea of the committee looking to co-create and not just work alone. It's not just one-sided. So it's a two-way approach to the reforms that they are working on, co-creation. And he also mentioned a lot of times in today's conversation that the committee is using a lot of data. So the committee is data-driven, which is really great. And it's something that the TADAT Secretariat encourages. If you look again into some of our POAs, you would see that we encourage data-driven decision-making. And Mr. Chairman also mentioned the outcome approach. So it's not just coming up with writing papers and writing these policies, but the committee is looking to achieve more outcomes than just the effort, like you mentioned earlier. This has been a great conversation. Mr. Chairman, would like to thank you very much. The TADAT Secretariat thanks you for coming on today to share more about the reform policies that the committee is working on. And it's great to see that the committee is taking into consideration the recommendations made by the TADAT assessments that have been conducted. Thank you so much for indulging our audience and answering all their questions. And to our audience, we would like to say thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for engaging with us, for all the questions. And if you have questions that haven't been answered, we encourage you to send us those questions. You can send them via the chat still or via email by email, emailing podcast@tadat.org, and we would make sure to get you the responses to those questions. Also, we encourage you to, if you're not already doing that, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, the TADAT Secretariat. You can rewatch today's episode. If you didn't have the time to watch it fully, you can rewatch today's episode. It will be on our LinkedIn and YouTube channel. So you can go back and rewatch them, and feel free to share amongst your network and let us know what you think about today's conversation. We'd really like to hear from you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for joining us today.
Thank you to the TADAT Secretariat for this program, and thank you, Wofai, for being an excellent moderator.
Thank you, you're so kind. And thank you to our audience. Till next time, we'll say goodbye for now. Thank you.